The opening sequence of episode 74 is very reminiscent of the series premiere back on Parody. Only this time, this is not the walled city of Shiganshina, and the kid about to be traumatized is not Eren. As we zoom out, Grisha notes that, compared to the world, it's like a tiny birdcage, which, again, is word for word what we see in Shiganshina. Just like with the Reiner flashback episode, it's all about emphasizing that duality of Eren and Zeke, and the consequences these different kinds of inherited hatred have on these young minds. Grisha then says that they can never leave this place, asking Zeke whether he would like to be free. Again, this connects right back to Eren's story, where, with his birth, we'd see Grisha explicitly note that you're born free. But the most important and most formative part of Zeke's story is what happens once the cleaner guy shows up. Once he sees their family, he is smiling and says that we don't get a lot of visitors here, and then just says that I'll come back later. He's just a kind old man, letting this family enjoy this moment of peace and quiet with their young child. But the moment he sees the armband, that shift is immediate, and among all the usual Eldian devil talk, he slips in something that we haven't really heard before.
You should be wiped out, so why are you breeding?
One of Zeke's most formative memories is not a beautiful day being destroyed by a monster beyond the walls. His memory is of his own father telling him that he is not free and never will be, only to have that instantly proven by a man who condemns his very birth. As they walk back, the humiliation still piling on, he tells Zeke that this is the world. If he doesn't like it, he's going to have to change it.
We need you to save everyone.
We'll obviously be talking all about this in depth later in the episode, but just one glimpse at Zeke's formative experiences already shows you just how drastically different his worldview would become. He knew he was trapped in a cage, and he knew he'd never leave. He knew they hated him, and they hated the very fact that he was born into this world. His father told him that the world is a big and scary place, a vast unknown compared to their small cage. So, in Zeke's mind, saving his people from suffering has a much simpler solution than a fight beyond the walls that would bring nothing more than more suffering and humiliation. Which neatly leads us into the title of Soul Salvation. This one's very straightforward, it's all about the euthanasia plan. And also, I guess we might as well talk about why it's called the euthanasia plan and not the sterilization plan, which it actually is. First off, there's the purely meta angle that is language and the connotations these words have in English versus Japanese. In the original Japanese, the term used for Zeke's plan is anrakushi, consisting of an meaning peace, ease, and quiet, raku meaning comfort and pleasure, and shi meaning death. So the term for euthanasia in Japanese just has this connotation of a comfortable and peaceful death, which is just much more fitting for Zeke's philosophy than the purely surgical sterilization. It's about the vibes and about the symbolism more so than it is the actual definition. Which then leads us on to number 2, the emotional beats Isayama wanted to hit with this dilemma. Functionally, this plan would bring about the sterilization of Eldians, but that in turn is a euthanasian of an entire people. By using the term euthanasia, it's not just about the peaceful parts. Rather, you immediately focus on the moral and philosophical weights of ending a life rather than preventing a future one. Sterilization is a future concern. Euthanasia is a present-day concern. And all of that is of course also wrapped up in Zeke's own perceptions of this plan being the quote-unquote right one, and how he is the one saving them from suffering. So again, in terms of connotations, picking euthanasia, which implies peace and comfort, just makes sense from Zeke's point of view. Moving into the episode itself, right away we see a whole lot of very interesting paralleling, not just to Eren, but also to Reiner. Similar to Reiner, we see how Zeke always fell behind, to the point of Magath wondering why he even bothered showing up at all. It's that same self-destructive, inherited fantasy of becoming a warrior, and how that would solve all their problems. The next generation and the individuals are irrelevant. Their suffering is just a means to an end for their ancestors. Shortly after that, just like with the young Eren, we see Grisha claim that Zeke will get it eventually, saying he has a special power in his blood and that he is their son. It's a slightly different version of largely the same thing. It's the old generation not only displacing their own ideology, desires, and beliefs onto their children, but also putting the whole of that burden onto their shoulders because they are the quote-unquote special ones. I'm sure we all know at least one example of this in the real world. Imagine like the dad who always wanted to be a football player but he was never good at it, and then suddenly his son is in like every single practice session ever because they're just an extension of their like unfulfilled insecurities and just desires. And because we've already seen Aaron's story, which obviously happens way into the future, Grisha's words here obviously ring hollow. Even if you were to interpret this in the most charitable way possible and just say that, okay, he wants his son to be successful in life, the end effect of that is still molding a child according to his own ideology and largely stripping him of any free thoughts. We see them briefly talk about the social dance club, that of course being the LD Restorationist meetings, and that Zeke misses them. This is one of the biggest contributors to Zeke eventually turning on Grisha. He was very rarely even around and was just neglectful. He didn't actually treat him as a son. For him, Zeke was largely just a tool, a mouthpiece for his own beliefs. And we see basically the same thing also happening on the opposite side, with old Mr. Jaeger teaching Marley's version of history to Zeke, just like he did with Grisha and Faye. He talks about the destruction of Lago 1200 years ago. He describes how it fell within a single day, and that the Titans continued their march, causing the horrors of Vale and the ravaging of Monty. Let's break this down bit by bit. First off, assuming this is even real, because the whole point of this story is that we don't know if it's real, this happened 1200 years ago during the Great Titan War. In other words, this is long after Ymir, but also before current calendars, in which it's only 830-ish at the time of the flashback. We don't have any lore detailing what year 0 signifies, but considering the rest of Marley's historical narratives, chances are it's some kind of great triumph in their own war efforts or something like that. In terms of concrete evidence though, we have nothing. Secondly, even if the entire story is a complete fabrication, it's still a very blatant example of the cyclicality of war, as it represents both the modern parody as well as Marley. The Titans all emerge from the sea and easily overpower their defenses, something we'd see repeated basically one-for-one with the ship fleet being wiped out by the rumbling. At the same time, this whole fell-in-one-night trick is very much a Marley thing. As we heard from Nicolo, they have conquered numerous nations this way, and I guess also kind of Ragako and parody like literally right now. In their narrative, it's only morally reprehensible when the enemy is doing it, but for Marley, it's this kind of massacre that made them literally call Zeke their golden boy. So whether it's the armbands on parody or the horrors of summoning titans, it's all hypocritical embellishments of history to justify and perpetuate this hatred. Thirdly, and this is tinfoil hat levels of overanalyzing, Jaeger then notes that the Eldian Empire had placed Titans among Marleyan escape routes, and at daybreak, they rose to attack. Yeah, so how do I put this? That's literally Zeke's plan in Shiganshina. They buried sedated Eldians and boxed in the scouts during the night of their approach. And right as dawn broke and the Shiganshina mission began, they transformed, completely blocking off any and all escape routes. So again, the horrifying acts of the Eldian Empire are being perpetuated by Marley's golden boy. And another tinfoil hat thing, this was actually potentially already shown to us in the Season 2 ED. After Isayama confirmed that the Wall Titans were in fact all just random Eldians, I assume that the ED depicted them waking up after the rumbling. The whole Wall Titans thing is an entirely different rabbit hole, so let's just leave that as a thing that may be, and let's not talk about it. But with this supposed attack at daybreak, it could rather be referring to this. These are the Titans waking up and going to attack the Marleyans. It's hard to say for sure, since the ED depicts both the rumbling as well as Lago, so it's cool to think about, but we don't really know. And again, I just have to wonder, how did Isayama ever convince Wit of what is and isn't mandatory foreshadowing? Like, imagine the conversation behind the scenes. Remember that the manga was not that far ahead of the anime, so Isayama must have literally been sitting there and saying, this can of herring, do not cut it. These weird things in the ED that I'm drawing, they must be in there. Poor guy must have been so paranoid after the whole Mikasa tattoo and Aaron's berserking Titan escapade in Season 1. It's funny to think about, but I do think with the Season 2 ED, it literally was like, yeah, I better go in there and do it myself. And the soundtrack throughout the sequence is so beautiful. It's a somber piano, with Zeke shifting his eyes, right as Jaeger asks, what is he really being taught? Zeke's story is not so much one of intense battles or immediate loss. Rather, it's one of, well, just misery in its clearest form. He is bombarded from two directly opposing sides with two different versions of history. And the worst part is that neither side really cares for him. They only care for the message that he will carry. He hears about the suffering of his people over and over again. His life, right from its earliest days, started to become one of just wanting to let go. of resigning from this burden and guilt altogether. And I think the piano piece, very fittingly titled Purpose, beautifully underscores that. And the cherry on top here is the very last exchange. His grandma promises to finish reading the book about the cat house, which finally makes him crack a smile. But a moment later, he glances at the picture of Faye, someone who suffered and died for no other reason than having been born in the first place. We see Zeke continue to struggle, with Magath looking over him in the same exact way as we saw with Keith back on Paradis. Except, there is one big difference. On his way back home, Zeke sees an Eldian boy playing ball with his dad, both lovingly joking about how they're awful at it. He rushes home, running to Grisha and saying that he finished training early and maybe they could, but he's promptly cut off, as Grisha notes that they'll just have more time to study. The single closest thing Zeke had to an actual loving parent was his grandma, who would occasionally cook for him or let him just be a kid. Aaron, on the other hand, had Carla, who would cherish every moment with him. For her, he was special and worth everything she had. And that, in a slightly bizarre twist of fate, shaped their military experience. Keith and Magath are pretty obviously meant to be kinda mirrors, kind of parallels to each other. But when Keith looked down on Aaron, it was all because he had to protect Carla's special boy. With Magath, there was none of that. Zeke was just another kid to him, and sure he did struggle, sure he might have even felt bad for him, but there was no emotional bond there whatsoever. Aaron's early life instilled in him a profound love for freedom. He was ready to fight and even die for the liberty of others, having known and cherished it himself. Zeke, on the other hand, understood only the confines of their cage. Without ever experiencing that genuine freedom or unconditional love, he had no inherent reason to value either life or liberty in the same way that Aaron did. He was never told that he's special for no other reason than having been born. He was never allowed to dream of the outside world, with his own father telling him that this is their cage. Both of them share the same father and the burdens he pushed onto them, but with every single interaction, we see the profound impact their upbringing had on their eventual philosophy. Similar, but also direct opposites. And to emphasize that even further, the following sequence directly mirrors Grisha's own trauma that, despite still reeling from today, he perpetuates in his own child. He directly contradicts Grandpa Yeager's story, saying that the tragedy of Lago never happened. It was all a made-up story to villainize Eldians. Again, in the context of Attack on Titan, it is largely irrelevant whether this is real. These two sequences happening back to back just work to show us that both sides in this conflict propagandize just about everything they can. If we go back to the Grisha flashback, we saw him chanting about Ymir without even knowing how to read it. So he is by no means a reliable narrator either. He would talk about how the goddess Ymir built roads and made them prosper, but we know for a fact that is not true. Those roads, all of those grand buildings, they were built by slaves. Ymir was no god, she was a weapon of war. What matters is that both sides use and listen closely here, a literally 1,000-year-old story to villainize the other. Which brings us to yet another painfully tragic scene. Zeke starts feeding into Grisha's stories for no other reason than wanting to feel his affection. This history, all of these ideologies start to lose any meaning to him, and he just becomes numb. Everything he does has just become a function or a tool. When he feeds into the narratives of Grandpa Yeager or Grisha, he gets affection. When he devotes himself to becoming a warrior, he gets affection. Lying becomes both his shield and his weapon. But underneath that, there is still that question. All of this struggle just to pay the price for existing? A single shed of empathy and affection? This is a pretty well-studied aspect of human psychology and how children that grow up in neglectful environments learn to lie and manipulate those around them. The full version of fight or flight actually includes two more things, freeze and fawn, with the latter being the diffusion of that conflict through people-pleasing. That becomes Zeke's stress response. Over and over, he will knowingly lie in completely contradictory ways just to avoid conflict. After another day of training, Zeke notices a baseball rolling on the streets, and Ksaver calls out to him. And right away, we have to talk about why Ksaver is here. He obviously lives in Liberio and should also be very close to Grisha's house as we see him walking around in Grisha's flashback. But even so, this little chance meeting of sorts always seemed a little bit too perfect to me. He began to accompany Magath to the new recruits' training pretty early on in his term, and in doing that, he must have seen that Zeke never had his parents show up and that he was always lagging behind. Considering his own past, I always thought that this meeting here is not an accident at all. I think he was deliberately there, waiting for Zeke to walk past. Right away, he compliments Zeke's throw, something that for Zeke is so foreign that he's almost startled. But a moment later, he sees the red armband, of course marking him as a warrior. Minor tangent into warrior lore, but I always found the entire Titan randomness really interesting, particularly with the Beast Titan. Judging by all the past Titans we see in the Battle of Heaven and Earth, there are clearly some differences between generation of shifters, sometimes even quite stark, but for the most part, their fundamental form, if you will, remains basically the exact same. Best example of this is Porkchop and Marcel. Their Titan forms are like literally the same, like they might literally just be a reused art design. Ymir's Titan form is admittedly nerfed, but that's a tangent of a tangent, let's not talk about that. With the Beast Titans on the other hand, well, it's a random beast. Ksaver was a weird looking goat thing, Zeke was the big monkey, and apparently there's also a dinosaur, or something. But point is, there are theoretically entire generations of Beast Titans that are just kinda duds. Imagine turning into a hamster, or a corgi, imagine a corgi Beast Titan. Which then brings up the, admittedly, very messed up question of, if Ksaver was not useful in war, why not just kinda re-roll the gacha and have someone new inherit the beast? I do suppose he's a bit of a special case, as he was also a researcher, and a ridiculously good one at that, but still, definitely makes you wonder. If they're all just weapons of war, why not just like, covertly re-roll the stats if you will? Zeke runs home, excited to tell Grisha about the new friend he made, but as he turns the corner, he overhears him and Grice, Falco's uncle, talking about how if Zeke isn't chosen, their plan is done. The Owl, aka Kruger, had said that he could only influence the decision if Zeke's scores were at least somewhat decent. And let's pump the brakes real quick, because Kruger's involvement in specifically Zeke's selection opens up an entirely new rabbit hole. If he is involved with the picking of Zeke, causality becomes even more murky. Like we talked about during the Attack Titan reveal, because of the circular enabling of Grisha becoming a Titan, which enables Eren to become a Titan, which retroactively enables Grisha to become a Titan in the first place, pinning down true causality is simply impossible. So the only real standing we have is to assume that the final Attack Titan is the root of that retroactive causality. In other words, it's not just Eren affecting Kruger's decision-making in picking Grisha, which in turn enables his ability to do that in the first place. It's also that Eren is affecting Kruger's decision-making in picking Zeke, which again, in turn enables that ability in the first place. And because Eren's causality is fundamentally a fixed loop, it again begs the question of, does free will exist at all, or is all of this just an illusion? But alright, this episode is about a lot more than timey-wimey shenanigans, so let's not get into that again. But as Zeke is caught eavesdropping, Grisha again just asserts that he is their son, and that he'd surely succeed. And again, Zeke just lies in both directions. He tells Magath that he is here to show his loyalty and to atone for Eldia's sins. But at the same time, he himself is a lie. He is here because of the Eldia Restorationists. Even with the framing here, look at how much negative space there is and how far into the corner Zeke is positioned. He is literally being pushed up against a wall, glancing up at something bigger just out of frame. The psychological weight he is under is so immense that the scene itself is just entirely off balance. Zeke tries, but he just keeps failing spectacularly, watching as Grisha and Dina both walk away in embarrassments. And again, Zeke is left alone. Except Ksaver, who is still attending the training and notices the entire thing.
Damn it! His best isn't enough! He'll never become a warrior like that!
I absolutely love this cut because, man, it is so raw. In a lot of fantasy, those moments of tragedy and cruelty will also be, well, fantasy. They're all metaphors and personifications of something very real, yes, but becoming a Titan, for example, still has a layer of disbelief. Even with something like Mikasa almost being trafficked, it's a very real thing, yes, but for a vast majority of people, that experience is not exactly relatable. With this, on the other hand, this hits pretty close to home. Feeling like a disappointment and trying to just fall asleep as you hear your parents arguing in the other room is unfortunately, a all too common of an experience. There is absolutely no shield of disbelief. Zeke hiding under a blanket and just pressing his ears closed is a lived experience for probably even many of you. And that is what Zeke's story is all about. Yeah, it is still tied up in all the Titan fantasy shenanigans, but by and large, it is simply one of neglect and of painful loneliness. For his entire lifetime, he was alone. Except for Ksaver. We see them throwing the ball again, with Ksaver joking that Zeke was an absolute mess, then saying that it'd be stupid for him to become a warrior anyway. He'd just shorten his lifespan and get sent to fight off other nations. This obviously shakes Zeke to his core, because like, a warrior is saying this. In his mind, this is like super mega ultra treason and he might get punished for just listening to it. But Ksaver goes on to explain that he is a researcher and just wants to learn about the Titans. This is where we get our first hints of the true Ymir history, which we won't get into for the sake of time, but he just says that compared to the mysteries of the Titans, hatred and war seem trivial. This is just the typical thing of scientists often condemning their own work, but still researching it for the sake of simply knowing. In the real world, a number of people who worked on the Manhattan Project, for example, didn't want to have anything to do with military or weaponry or really anything like that. But it was also the only real place where such research could be conducted at all. They always saw the bigger picture, they feared the catastrophic cascade they were starting, but just like Ksaver, they remained largely powerless. He goes on to say that the two of them are decent people, they don't care for these war games. And just like with their first time playing ball, a light appears across Zeke's face. He just said he was a good person, and that this hatred is trivial. We cut to him later in the day, for the first time in his life saying, this is for the best. Even if I can't leave the zone, and pay attention here, as long as I'm alive. Zeke finally found a reason to keep holding on. He could keep playing ball with Ksaver right up until the day he died, and that would be okay. He doesn't need to be a savior, he doesn't need to be the special son. All he needed was for someone, anyone, to say that he is enough. That same afternoon, Zeke overhears the officers talking about finding leads to the LD Restorationists, with them already singling out the owl. Over dinner, Zeke notices the dismissive and disappointed face of Grisha. He composes himself and tells the both of them to stop doing these dangerous things. And what we see next is effectively a perfect reversal of Grisha as a child, where he condemned the teachings of Marley and said that he and Faye never did anything wrong, and that invited the wrath of his father. Zeke wants to live this kind of life, even fully knowing that he is not quote-unquote free and that they are in this cage. He has found a purpose and he is content, but just like with the kid Grisha, that too invites the wrath of his father. And as the pressure keeps mounting, an audible rumbling now filling the scene, Zeke just asks,
"Would you still say that if you knew that I could end up like Aunt Faye?"
As Grisha screams at Zeke about how she only died because the world is cruel and that they are fighting to fix it, tears start streaming down his face as he again just becomes that scared child listening to the yelling of his parents. And the sad reality, and really what makes all this compelling, is the fact that neither party here is entirely wrong. Like we talked about with the Grisha flashback, you can point out that old Jaeger was ignorant and that he was basically just fine to lay down and die, or really whatever, but he told these things to Grisha and Faye because he wanted to protect them. And that is doubly true after what happened to Faye. Of course he drilled Marleyan propaganda into Grisha because he didn't want him to wander out and die just like his sister. To him, history and the story he was telling was completely irrelevant. There is nothing wrong about wanting to protect your kids. And the same thing is true here. Grisha is a terrible father to Zeke, and all of this is unfairly done at the expense of Zeke's life. But he is also not entirely wrong. Faye did die because of Marleyan cruelty, not because they did quote-unquote dangerous things or anything. She died simply because their people were hated, and that must be set right. That's what makes all of these characters compelling. They are all rational actors with quote-unquote justified reasoning behind their actions. The problem is, they all swerve into the extreme ends of those actions, and that's when things become very, very complicated. Because while the root of their ideology or philosophy is perfectly justified, the means is where it gets murky. And with that, let's take a quick break from the depressing philosophical debates and talk about the Titan Science Midcard. Yeah, so they basically know nothing, which is cool because magic is magic and magic is cool, you don't need to explain everything, otherwise it's not magic, it's science. But that also means there's not exactly a lot of things for me to yap about. So, back to depressing philosophy, we see the airship soar beyond the wall, something that is of course now a very common motif of entrapment, both in a physical sense but also a metaphorical one. And on that note, we see Zeke tell Ksaver about his parents' dance club that may or may not involve plots to kill. This next sequence, bravo ECMA and Mappa doesn't even cut it. The way we go from Zeke's complete resignment and him just saying goodbye, to Ksaver telling him to report his parents, to him denying that, only for us to smash cut to their arrest while that same dialogue is going.
They never loved you. You've done nothing wrong.
The way it blends this absolutely mortifying dread of knowingly sending your parents to death, but also this weird, bittersweet catharsis is nothing short of brilliant. This is arguably the single best thing that has happened in Zeke's life. Ksaver is absolutely right in saying that they never truly loved him. He has done nothing wrong. He was just a means to an end for them, and if he kept on doing this, more than likely he would have been right there on the wall. But still, for a child to condemn his own parents to become titans, it's... oh boy. But with that, we flash 10 years later to Zeke and Ksaver still playing ball. Only this time, he's already coughing and generally much weaker. He talks about the finding of his research, most of which we've already talked about before, so we'll go rapid fire. Rewriting Eldian memories is of course the whole basis of Parady's existence, and why securing the Founding Titan was such a big deal in the Royal Government arc. Nothing new there, we've already dealt with most of this. He then notes that this control also extends to the anatomy of their bodies. He talks about a plague that's pretty clearly meant to be the bubonic plague that ravaged the world, only for the Founding Titan to just kinda magically cure all Eldians. I would talk about the weird Parody sickness, but we already did that with Grisha's flashback, so let's not do it again. Yes, I know there's a lot of citations in this video, it is what it is. This flashback is just very dense. This is obviously the foundation for the entire euthanasia plan, and why Zeke needs the Founding Titan in the first place. And that's exactly what we see, with us flashing back to that man atop the rooftop, asking why do they keep pumping out children? Zeke just asks outright, can the Founding Titan make it impossible for the subjects of Ymir to bear children?
This is all hypothetical, isn't it? All academic.
Upon hearing Zeke's proposal, Ksaver trembles, saying he never intended to tell this to Zeke, but he had a family once. He removed his armband and they had a child. But after she learned that he was Eldian, she... you know, in terms of emotional beats, this is a moment of absurdly powerful connection for Ksaver and Zeke, because both of them largely hate themselves for existing in the first place. In their mind, there is no one to blame. It was their existence that brought the suffering not only to themselves, but also everyone around them, enemies or loved ones. When Zeke just lays out the simple question of, what if we just make it so that we don't exist in the first place, Ksaver can't help but dream. And the way that trauma is depicted here is absolutely beautiful. He is literally put back into that room, watching over his own child and wife in a pool of blood, simply because he existed. He doesn't care about wars or freedoms, all he wants is to end his suffering. Becoming a warrior was an indirect and a passive way of doing that. But through that, he met Zeke. He found a purpose, to just play ball with this little boy, day after day, month after month, year after year. He found a son in him, a thing to look forward to after his work was done, a reason to wake up in the morning because he knew that boy would be right there waiting for him to just play ball. With Ksaver is just incredibly severe depression that manifests in, first, his passive Sudoku ideation, and later, extreme nihilism. With Zeke, on the other hand, the euthanasia plan, that is actually a sterilization plan, draws on very specific real-world philosophies, namely antinatalism and existential nihilism. Starting with the former, antinatalism is, in short, the belief that procreation of all sentient beings is unethical and unjustifiable. There are many different justifications people use, but in Zeke's case, it's a very straightforward interpretation. Life will have joy, but it will also have suffering. If that suffering is inevitable, life should have never existed in the first place, regardless of what the net calculation would have looked like. It's a very binary, will life have even a tiny amount of suffering? Yes, then it should not have existed in the first place, because why would you create life only for it to suffer? Why would you bring something into this world out of nothing, while knowing for an absolute fact that it will experience pain if you have the option to 100% ensure that it never happens? by simply not bringing them into this world. And on top of that, there's the free will argument. Functionally, everyone is forced to exist. No one gets a character creation screen and no one can consent to existence. So, by extension, your freedom was taken away from you the moment you came to be. And the people forcing that upon you should be the baddies. They did this without your consent. And in Zeke's case, he is literally just a pawn for his parents, which he too did not consent to. It's an ancient philosophy dating as far back as ancient Greece, and has continued to be prominent even in recent times with the likes of Arthur Schopenhauer, largely because it's a pragmatic argument that fundamentally clashes with a equally pragmatic argument of a species' survival. Like, the first extremely basic question to ask is, well then, does everything just die out? And the answer is inevitably kinda, yeah, pretty much. Again, this is philosophy, this has gone back and forth for literally hundreds of years. You can say, well, I didn't consent to this, how is it my problem? How is humanity my problem? I don't care about the survival of a species, I care about me, yada yada yada. And a few more important caveats before we move on. Antinatalism is a value judgment, not a movement, or a religion, or a cult, or even a philosophy per se. It's just a belief that people hold. Zeke's plan is obviously not a belief, it's weird reverse eugenics with an actual plan of how to do it, so that's really bad. Pronatalism, on the other hand, is typically used to describe actionable government policies to increase birth rates. Think tax breaks for families, parental leave policies, subsidized childcare, and so on. And there's still existential nihilism, which in Zeke's case is kinda similar to antinatalism, but also a lot bigger in scope. It's a philosophical theory that life has no objective purpose or meaning or anything, with the natural follow-up being, then why exist at all? Again, there's a ton of overlap here, so Schopenhauer pops up again. He argued that boredom is proof of the inherent pointlessness of life. If life itself had purpose, we would not feel boredom. It's essentially an argument about the ever-shifting goalposts of what humanity wants or needs, which in turn creates suffering because we are never satisfied. We chase an illusion of a purpose only to end up in a never-ending wheel that we cast upon ourselves. There are many different variations on this nihilism. Some talk about how humans are a bizarre quirk that somehow overdeveloped the ability to understand, which goes against nature. That in turn makes humanity a bit of a paradox which spends its entire existence trying to not be human. Some argue that the lack of purpose is actually the solution to existential dread, as in the cliche, life is what you make of it, and so on. Many different arguments in all kinds of directions, but the core of it is just that life has no purpose. So, TLDR, Zeke uses the value judgment of antinatalism, and with the power of the Founding Titan, aims to force that onto people. By definition, he will prevent suffering. But the act of forcing things onto others, or, literally modifying their bodies without their consent, is how this conversation started, not to mention the purely practical concerns of just stopping new people from being born and the suffering that would cause on parity. But in his mind, and yeah, this is obviously very ironic, the ends do justify the means. And knowing that, if you go back to Shiganshina, him getting angry at the scouts, just charging into their deaths and saying that it's some noble sacrifice, everything he says there definitely hits very different. Also, quick step back from philosophy, note the goat symbolizing Ksaver's Beast Titan, just like we've seen with Zeke and the monkey in Erwin's Charge. And also, note the 3 dolls, which are almost certainly Ymir, Zeke, and Eren. And also, the symphonic suite in the background, oh my god.
Look at him!
And also, like, this is a complete tangent, but can we please talk about how ridiculously well Isayama did the characterization of what are supposed to be villains and antagonists? This is the guy who killed Erwin and joked about playing baseball as literally everyone around him just died. He just killed the entirety of Levi's forces, yet here I was, sitting in 2021 saying, yeah bro, that's kinda messed up, but it does also kinda make a little bit of sense. I guess it really shouldn't come as a surprise, considering Reiner is the favorite of many fans, but personally, I think Zeke's flashback and the way his story is revealed to us is Isayama's absolute strongest writing. I think something a lot of people don't really think about is how uncomfortable actually writing a lot of this stuff out is. As an author, you don't want to endorse certain beliefs if you just want to realistically explore them. As soon as you write a tragic backstory that clearly makes us sympathetic around someone like Zeke who holds these beliefs, it becomes very hard not to make it look like you're also endorsing this philosophy. Flock and the Agorists are another perfect example of this. They are a realistic exploration of a very, very bad thing. But because we see the entire A to B to C story of how they got there, there are people who might take that as justification or endorsement of their values, when it never was. Don't get me wrong, that is a skill issue and a lack of basic media literacy, but it is also still a very real concern for the author. That aside though, the way Zeke's philosophy is incorporated in the story and the way it's mirrored to Carla's all life is special and later also Armin is just art in the most literal sense, it's so good. Ksaver then explains the process of bypassing the vow to renounce war. Again, we've talked about this ad nauseum before, so if you still have questions about the mechanics, look at the screen right now, I know you're not looking. What's very suspect though, is this.
Don't worry, I'll find them, Father.
If you're a normal person with a functional brain, this is where a single tear rolls down your cheek because Zeke just called Ksaver his dad, which, let's be real, he absolutely is, and Grisha is stinky. But if you're me, what if he is still talking to Grisha? And what if that causality we talked about with the Owl's involvement is still at play and was just strengthened as he obtained his Titan? What if he is telling Grisha that he will find Eren not for the euthanasia plan, but for the rumbling? Keep in mind that the final Founding Titan is held and controlled by Eren, meaning that all of this— okay, let's stop throwing tomatoes at me. He's talking about Ksaver, alright, fine. We cut forward to just after the events of Season 2 and the Warriors' failed capture of Eren, with the Marley squad finally regrouping and Reiner dropping all the lore about Shiganshin and Eren. Zeke is obviously shook by the weird twist of fate that is Eren holding the Founding Titan and how Grisha is effectively the cause of it all. But again, we've yapped about all this extensively before. That being said though, a very important detail that is easy to miss here is Zeke repeatedly saying that he will save Eren. We'll get to this during the Paths storyline, but this is largely the reason why Zeke lost. He wanted to show and to convince Eren that his way was the correct one. It wasn't about winning or instantly using the Founding Titan. He wanted Eren to understand, to agree with him, and for them to do this hand in hand. And with that, we cut to their meeting in Liberio, just moments before he met with Falco earlier in the season. We get the follow-up of him saying that he looks nothing like his father, with him now saying that he is beginning to see the resemblance. The reasoning for that is of course purely symbolical. Seasons 1 to 3 Eren was fighting for the sanctity of life and for the freedom that his mother valued, while Season 4 Eren's version of that freedom is a lot more extreme and is also the literal cause of his mother's death, aka that ideal. Cold Light also plays here, and I just really want to play it again because it's really, really cool, so listen. Eren recounts the memories of the Crystal Catacombs, saying that the royal family was bound by the vow, and that Grisha's slaughter is what allowed them to live. Zeke momentarily thinks that this is Eren agreeing with Grisha, but a moment later, Eren says no. It was a mistake. Those children in the Crystal Catacombs, the people of these walls, and the walls of Paradis, even he himself, would have never had to suffer. They would have never had to die in this plan. Then adding the single most succinct version of what antinatalism is. There is no greater salvation than never being born into this world. Also, bonus fact, the dub changes this line and it's also really cool.
This world was never our birthright. It's a hell to be saved from.
Eren promises that they will end the suffering brought upon by the Titans, turning to Zeke and calling him his brother. Just like many times with Ksaver, that immediately rattles something deep inside that traumatized young boy. Tears swell in his eyes, and he says that he'd really like a handshake, but that it's best not to make contact just yet. Instead, going to offer him the baseball. First off, this is him fulfilling the promise he made to Ksaver. He supposedly met the person who understood him, and so the baseball becomes this ultimate form of trust. Secondly, and yes, I know I use this meme all the time, but imagine a story where not catching a ball is a massive plot twist, because we don't see him catch the ball in this episode, because he didn't catch it. There was never any, quote-unquote, handshake. They never agreed. It's all a lie. The fact that we didn't see it should have raised alarm bells for anyone watching. But thirdly, a lot of people are still asking, why didn't they just make contact right here? The reasoning is pretty straightforward. From Aaron's point of view, he wants to have everyone within the walls when they come down and wipe the world. He can't really be sure that everyone else is safe right now, and popping the Titan right in the middle of Liberio is probably not a great idea either. And more than that, there's also the mechanics of the Founding Titan, which are still quite murky in his mind. So feeding into Zeke's plan and then double-crossing him is just the smart play. From Zeke's point of view, however, it might seem like he's being a bit of a goofy goober for not just, instantly doing what he wanted to do, just rewrite Eldian biology and then just do whatever. But in actuality, even more so than with Aaron, there's a ton of doubt in his mind. All of this is still just a flimsy theory. They don't know how it works, something that was on full display with, Aaron breaking through to Amir and controlling the Founding Titan regardless of the royal blood. Do not leave a comment about this, we are not talking about this today. And more than that, remember that Zeke truly believes that this is a plan of minimizing suffering. The proposed plan of the mini rumbling was not a total lie. He needs to be on parity as a sort of a deterrent to spook Marley into not pulling anything as the Eldians slowly die out. Also, once again, the Mappa eyes, they never miss. But with that, we finally return to the present day, with Levi having heard most of Zeke's mumbling about the euthanasia plan. Before I say anything else, the wet fabric and the rain animation here is absolutely breathtaking, like, oh my god, look at the shading, it's so clean. Zeke continues saying that he actually saved the children of Levi's comrades, saying they'll never have to be born into this cruel world. But understanding that, in his current state, and with Levi watching over him, it's just practically game over, he tries pulling one last desperate attempt at the euthanasia plan and potentially getting rid of the Levi issue in the process.
Mr. Summer! I hope you're still watching!
And with that, that is episode 74. This is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of my favorite episodes in all of Attack on Titan. Again, Zeke, supposed to be an antagonist, a villain, right? But when we see his backstory, a lot of things start making sense, and in terms of internalizing this guilt and blaming all of it on yourself and basically saying that me just existing is causing all these problems, it's a completely different perspective on what we've seen. And once you rewatch the series, knowing where Aaron's story goes and how he externalizes this guilt to, again, an extreme degree, is just that duality there is so perfect, and I think it perfectly illustrates kind of the heart at war with itself. I love it. I think it perfectly encapsulates the Attack on Titan story, and I think it kind of perfectly encapsulates what it really means to be human. I'm not going to turn this into another bit of overanalyzing at the end of a video, but if we go back to Grisha's story and the whole was I the problem or the world around me, most likely it was both, that's what we see with Aaron and Zeke. Alright, I just got a message from the company, we've ran out of budget for yapping. So with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team. Company sent me a list again. Inglorious Baxter, I guess, James Colorusso, Good Vibes, and Solange. Something like that. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.